All right. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Peoples, and I am a gerontologist and founder of Gero What. And on behalf of all the members of the Black and Gerontology and Geriatrics community, we would like to welcome you to this webinar entitled The Legacy of Black Elders, Documenting and Preserving Stories and Contributions, supported by the Aging Federation for Aging Research and the Burroughs Wellcome Funds. Our expert panelists joining us today are Dr. Raina Croff, Mr. Jordan Evans, and Miss Adrianne Jones. They will share their insights on how we can document and preserve the contributions of Black elders in our communities and through our work. To provide an overview, there will be an audience question and answer session immediately following the planned moderated questions. The question and answer session will last about 15 minutes. You can type your questions in the chat box at any time during the presentation. To provide context for our attendees, I will give each panelist approximately 3 minutes to introduce themselves. First, we will hear from Dr. Croft.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I am associate professor of neurology at Oregon Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, but my background is a little bit different from most neurologists that I work with. My background is in archaeology of the African diaspora. And then I shifted to medical anthropology, and now working in neurology, I am a neuroanthropologist. And so what I do is I examine ways that culture affects brain health, but also how can we use culture to promote brain health and to motivate brain healthy behaviors. So I'll just jump right in. What I do is I design culturally celebratory and historically conscious brain health programming that really puts culture and history at the center of anything that is about research in brain health in older Black adults. And so I designed and I lead a SHARP study. SHARP stands for Sharing History Through Active Reminiscence and Photo Imagery, but all you have to remember is SHARP. And what that is it is a neighborhood walking study. And so this is an example of a culturally celebratory and historically conscious design for research. And what our participants do is in groups of threes, they walk in the historically Black and gentrifying neighborhoods of Portland, also in Seattle, and we're starting up in Oakland soon, hopefully. And what they do is they navigate these 1 mile walks that my team and I have created. And these walks are accessed on a tablet device. And on our application, we have 72 of these themed routes. And so these routes have historical memory markers that pop up. And these are images of of local Black culture, life, history, people in the community from 1940 to 2010. And as the groups of threes walk around the neighborhood, they are using these images as conversational prompts. And so they are having these amazing interwoven conversations and perspectives about different locations, some of which they might be standing in front of and seeing it's still there, but maybe it's, now something else, being in a gentrified neighborhood, or maybe it's not there at all. And then these histories are recorded for a digital oral history archive. So what participants experience is connection and feeling like they are addressing this very important issue of gentrification and aging in place as Black adults in a very changing neighborhood. They're experiencing something to look forward to, but really what this is, not really, and what this is in terms of brain health, they're increasing their physical activity, their social engagement, and it's in a way that is culturally meaningful to the community and also to the individual. So that's what I do. And in my discussion today with everyone here, that's primarily what I'll be referring to in my work and how we record our participants' experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. All right, now we are going to hear from Mr. Evans.
Hi, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here. So, I'm Jordan Evans, and I am co founder of Art Against Ageism. And we are a nonprofit that is dedicated to leveraging art and creativity to combat ageism and promote positive age beliefs. We do this through using artistic activism, which is not a new thing at all. It is a pillar of any civil rights movement and has been used in every civil rights movement since people have been since people have been advocating for the civil rights of others, it is or themselves. So, and because it's something that is a timeless tool of protest and civil rights, I'm so excited to just talk about this. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about, being a Black man, and in spaces that we don't really get to have this conversation. So I'm really excited to talk about one, how artistic activism has been used to throughout our history as African Americans or people of color, generally. And then also, I'm excited to talk about how today often the stories of Black elders are marginalized and forgotten and erased by systemic ageism and systemic racism. And at Art Against Ageism, we believe that art and storytelling have the power to combat these injustices. So I'm really excited about how we can explore the importance of documenting and preserving the contributions of Black elders and how we can find spaces as Raina, as you just mentioned, how our neighborhoods are being broken up and how we can still find spaces and find places and find opportunities to volunteer and go into the spaces where we have a large amount of those voices and those stories to be told. So I'm super excited about this, as I mentioned, and thank you so much, Sandra. I just had a baby on Saturday, and I just want to tell a brief story. My grandfather, who is 85 years old, um, I was able to FaceTime him and show him his great granddaughter. And I am just so excited. I remember growing up and my grandfather telling me stories and just having those stories live with me. And I'm so excited to be able, just blessed to have that an opportunity that my grandfather is still alive to tell those stories to my daughter. So, as I got ready for this, that was just sitting on my heart and just how lucky I am to have that grandparent effect and how again, we need to facilitate more of that grandparent relationship so that our community can retain its stories. If you think about, in the last story, I'm sorry if I'm going over time. Um, when people from Africa, when slaves were being brought over to the United States or the colonies at the time, and or other places, one of the most amazing things that they did to preserve their food. I'm a big foodie. I always try and talk about food. Is they sewed seeds into the braids of their hair in order to preserve a lot of the foods that we know and love and just are a part of us today. I mean, all of the foods from Africa came through the hair of our ancestors. And that is just amazing. And you think about those stories and just knowing the power of hair. It just adds more context. And so that's another, just like how important stories are to just understanding more of who we are. So that is why I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so glad to be with you three amazing women who I've been following for so long.
Thank you for sharing your stories. Very beautiful. And congratulations on your baby. So finally, we will hear from Miss Jones.
Hi, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be among all of you. I know we've said that before, but just to be, Black and in this space is so amazing, and to share this space, this platform, with all of you who are on the panel and all of those who are in attendance, because there's some heavy names that I see among the attendees. I know Jordan, you just spoke about hair. Hair is big. That could be its own seminar and panel discussion. But no, my name is Adrianne D. Jones. I am the creator and radio host of the Gero Juice, and it's a show I created with African American seniors in mind, because I know some of our radio shows, they just naturally draw African American audiences, but I wanted something that, was specifically designed to reach African American households and grasp the attention of our seniors. The show is written in script from setting to language. With our seniors in mind, with our young adults in mind, as a space where we can all come to the table, sit down with your coffee and your tea. And I wrote it, with the inspiration of my grandmother's home. Her table, her dining room table, was that melting pot where we talked about everything from, with tears and sex and cigarettes and health and what to do and what not to do. And so that's what that's what the show is based off of. I am also the founder and CEO of Senior Resources and Consulting Services. And we're based here in Atlanta, but the sole mission is to connect seniors with the resources that they need. And in doing so, I'm finding that many of my clients are the businesses, the agencies, the organizations that have this great plan mapped out, but they don't know how to reach seniors. And not just any seniors, they don't know how to reach vulnerable seniors, low-income seniors, Black seniors. And, I tell people all the time, when you have a service, a program, that you can't come at seniors like you're selling a car. You have to know how to speak the language. You have to know exactly what their needs are. And so that's what the mission is at Senior Resources, is to bring some of those resources to the doorsteps of our seniors, but also in a way that's respectable of the culture, and their needs. And so those are two things that I do. Some of you know I wear many hats out here. Sometimes I forget the hats that I wear because I don't see myself as somebody that wears a title, but I always call myself a servant leader because that's what we're doing. This is strictly service. Sometimes you get paid for it, sometimes you don't. Many of us have gotten into it because of our passion. And so that's what fuels me, and that's what fuels everything that I'm doing. So again, it's an honor.
Thank you. Love that. Thank you all for what you do. We are going to move on to the questions. So the first question is, how do we ensure that the stories and contributions of Black elders are accurately represented in research and practices? I'll throw that off to you, Dr. Croft. You want to start it?
Sure, that seems to be a trend. I'll start. Well, first off, if people are going to tell what's really important to them and their stories, and they're going to have an honest conversation, they need to be comfortable with the person that's in front of them. And so I think we need to shed our frameworks of assumption that someone is comfortable with us just because we are Black. I am from Portland and it's my hometown community, but we still had to demonstrate that we were trustworthy. We had to demonstrate that our project, that we had sustainability in mind, that we were going to be reporting back to the community and how we were going to do that. We maintain relationships. So really, it's being in the community before you're trying to extract from the community. And I think it's also this idea of what Adrianne just said. It's really, as researchers, we're trying to recruit into studies, but before that, it is service before sign up. We have to be in the community and demonstrate that we're not some researchers on a hill. Well, OHSU, where I work, is literally on a hill. So we have to demonstrate that we're not separated, that we are also part of this community. And so I think setting that stage, I mean, I have more to say, but I want to hear from the others, but setting that stage of trust and where these stories are going to go and what they're going to be used for. And also connecting how is it part of the national story that is helping advance science and inclusion research. I think that's all so important to be transparent about and to communicate to those of whom we're asking to tell their stories.
All right, I'll throw it to you, Jordan. Did you want
I'm
to
trying to
add
come
to
off mute. I was like, can I just jump in? I absolutely agree. This will be a resounding thing from me. I'll continue to say this like a broken record, but art is so important to create that space of comfort. It's affect, it is emotion. Art is literally emotion, and when you put activism behind it, it's emotion with action behind it. It's emotion with purpose. um I think about how you can use art to preserve stories and tell the stories in a different way, and make it relatable, because I everyone remembers like your grandparents sitting you down and telling you this like long story that you can't relate to, but being able to preserve it in a way that transcends that the lecture, and allows you to engage with it with multiple senses and in different mediums, is just so powerful, and um, it helps it be immortalized and shared across generations. I consider the work of, and I wrote it preparing for this. I wrote a bunch of notes, so please excuse me if I'm looking at something. But Elizabeth Catlett was a sculptor and printmaker who used her art to highlight the struggles and triumphs of African Americans, particularly women and elders. So one of her famous works is Mother and Child, which portrays the resilience of and strength of Black motherhood. And I also think about Gee's Bend, which is a community in Alabama which used quilt making and the traditions of quilt making of African American women. And these quilts often were made by Black elders, and recognize the significant contribution to art, creativity, and history. And so those are just like different mediums that can take that story. And I remember, I can also keep talking about baby things. I remember as a kid, Aesop's fables and other like going back to like African, I think Aesop's fables and African folklore and folk tales, and other just like stories of ways that you can. I mean, I remember getting a nursery book, a children's book of African stories, and it was from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but because it was in that different medium, it can be preserved. And so I always like take the opportunity to create and then tell that story through the creation.
Right up and say that everything both of you said, Dr. Croft and Jordan, we're right on point with what I have. So I was looking at this question and I was like, from my lens as a radio host that created a show for Black seniors, I seen it as us creating those spaces that will accurately represent our people. And so in saying that, when we go in some of these rooms, when we sit at some of these tables, we're wearing a big hat. We're not just wearing that researcher hat or that practitioner hat, but we're also wearing the hat as an advocate. So when we're sitting there, it's important for us to speak up for some of those seniors that will never see these rooms. They will never see these rooms. They will never be able to sit at these tables. So, yeah, when you get to the room and you're sitting at those tables, share that story about that senior down the street from your grandmother. who's a widow now, who cannot afford the medication, who has unique issues specific, to her and her family. Talk about Mr. Frank, who was 107 and he passed away with no family. Well, he passed away because they passed away before he did. So he doesn't have family and friends, but he couldn't read. He needed somebody to read his medication and help him with his bill pay and things like that. So I think it's important for us to tell those stories and to understand that when we're coming in representing our families, yes, but the community and the culture. We're carrying some big responsibilities on our back. And when I think of this question, I always go back to, the right to vote and how we gain that right to vote, if that makes sense. When our grandparents, our great grandparents, when our ancestors stood up for the right to vote, it was not just for them at the time, but they were thinking down the line, okay, this right to vote, I want my children to have this right, my legacy, my great great grandchildren. I may not live to see them, but I want to know that I stood up for something that's going to impact them. So just like us, when we get in those rooms and we're on these projects and we hear something like, no, this is not going to fly for my people. That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. Going back to what you said, Dr. Croft, about trust. No, if it doesn't sound right, you know how we, know that saying, that theme, if you see something, say something. Well, if you hear something that comes across whatever project or whatever program that you're on, say something about it and say, no, we need to come up with something else. These are the stories that I'm hearing while I'm out in the community. And, I know many of us, we probably know some unique stories, some wow stories, but don't just keep those buried. Make sure that you're telling people, because that could change the future of a program or a policy by sharing some of our elder stories.
I completely agree. And if we can spend just a little bit more time on this topic, because this is essentially like what my work is about. I love the different perspective we're taking on this question, because as a qualitative researcher, I'm really looking at like methodology. How can we get them to the space, or we enter into their space? How can we make that space comfortable? How can we then get an honest reflection of either their experience in the research or their other experiences they're bringing from their life that affects why they even want to participate in research. So I think of storytelling as being interactive, right? It's not just like us here. We have an audience and people are going to be asking questions. And a story is this living thing where people need some response. It's like a form of call and response. They need response to show that you hear them, that you're engaged. And that's their cue to keep going with their story and to go deeper and go deeper. So as a qualitative researcher, that is a science, qualitative methodology. And so often I see just anyone stepping in to do the qualitative research aspect, the moderator. But it's really, I've had training in it, and it's not to say that I'm elite and set apart. Anyone can get this training, but there are real methodologies. And some of that methodology is to make sure you're not creating biased questions, because if you want to hear what they are really trying to tell you, you can't just ask questions where they're pretty much parroting back a response that they think you want to hear. And so that means intentionally, of course, not only really crafting the questions and maybe crafting those questions and the whole design of the research with seniors and older adults, right? But when you are moderating, or I keep saying moderating because I lead focus groups and that's how we get our stories. But to leave space for reflection and then a heartfelt response. I think we're often unexperienced story gatherers, or I would say interviewers. They want to fill in all the silences. But silence is so meaningful because people have to process the question. They have to reflect on a life experience that they want to bring to this conversation. And then they need the space to really deliver that. And if we, as the researchers, are trying to fill in those gaps because we're nervous or we think the question didn't make sense, we're going to clog this flow, this dynamic flow of information and trust building. We need to build that space that allows those that we're engaging with that we want to hear from you and learn from you, and we are willing to create the time and space that may not fit with traditional academic timekeeping, to allow this story to really be birthed, essentially.
Thank you for sharing that. It really goes into the next question, which is asking what are the ways that historical preservation efforts can be tied to addressing contemporary social issues affecting the aging Black community, such as health disparities and the ability to age in place.
And I really want Raina for you to answer this, but I just want to say that I think today's aging issues in the Black space are yesterday's aging issues in the Black space and 20 years ago's issues in the Black space. And you know, I just, I would love to spend some time even talking about the aging inequities, and racial aging inequities. But Raina, or Dr. Croft, you are an expert in the tools and the modalities of gathering. So I'd love for you to speak on that.
Okay, thank you. I'm an expert in the way that I've learned, but there are other ways. So I certainly do not have a monopoly on that as an anthropologist. Uh, so I mean, I can talk about the Sharp study. That is a way in which we are able to address a very pressing issue, which is gentrification, displacement. Feeling a sense of disconnect and no longer belonging in the neighborhood where one grew up and where one, for generations that was considered a Black area of town. And that sense is compounded when you think of the Pacific Northwest and Portland, right? Where Oregon is 2% Black, Portland's like 6-7% Black, right? And then the history of redlining. But in the Sharp study, when people walk through the gentrified neighborhoods, they are not only engaging in brain healthy behavior, something that's good for their health, and not only are they connecting with individuals, but they're being seen and they're felt seen. They feel that they are being seen. And that's so important because it's a statement that says we are still here and that we are still part of this community, and that community is not what we see in the ads, which is usually full of young people drinking coffee or, whatever comes to mind when we think of gentrified spaces. But community is a gamut of life experiences and ages. And when you do not have all spectrum of humans and different age groups and life experiences, it may be a form of community, but it's not, to me, it's not the community that I want to be in. I want to be in a robust community where we have a diversity of experiences, not just from race, but from age and life experience. So I'm kind of getting off track here, but I think there are ways in science, like we did a study where we looked at this national survey. It's the behavioral, I'm forgetting the BERFIS, behavioral, I'm sorry, I don't remember the, but anyway, the study looked at how did people understand caregiver and cognitive decline modules. These are older Black adults. And this is a survey that's being asked across, a telephone survey asked across the nation of all different kinds of folks. And so what we found was that they didn't necessarily understand the terms memory loss and confusion the way that they were intended to be understood in the module. So I think first is making sure that some of the research questions we're asking are as unbiased as possible, but also, are we speaking the same language? I mean, that's essentially the title of this paper that we wrote was, are we talking about the same thing? So when we talk about health disparities, and when we talk about asking about people's experience with health disparities or capturing those experiences, are we as researchers using the same language and understanding of some of these terms that come up? So I'm going to stop there, but that's just my little tidbit for now. But I'm excited to hear what other people say so I can kind of riff off your perspective and what you bring.
When I was looking at this question, I love all the questions, and it took me right back to radio. For me, one of those historical preservation efforts that we've had as a community is that we have kind of got behind leaders And these leaders in our community over several decades have emerged from whatever it was, from sports. I recently saw the documentary on Edwin C. Moses, and how even when he got to that Olympic platform, he not only was there for himself, but he was there for us as a race of people. So from sports to music, church, even education, we've kind of like assigned leaders to go out there, lead our people, tell our stories, and preserve our stories in our community. And make it not just a community voice, but a global voice and a global effort. So, when I think about that leadership and that leader that we could get behind, that could preserve some of this and bring some of these social issues to light, I think of the infamous Raymond A. Jetson and his Aging While Black movement, and how, he came and he pulled up to the table unapologetically, and he said, you know what, this is what's going on. Blacks are not aging like everyone else is aging. And so let me tell you what's going on. Let me give you the real. And if y'all catch on to this and support me, fine. If you don't, you're still going to hear from me. But it's that type of leadership that has brought us, through decades, from the Martin Luther Kings to the Angela Davises to the even James Brown. That's what I'm Black and I'm Proud is built behind. So using our talents, to highlight and preserve our stories, that's what we've done, even in the arts. And so even using radio. People don't know that radio amongst African Americans is still the most widely used form of media. We still listen to radio from all across all age groups, but using radio to say, hey, guess what? This is the information, this is the education. And that's what I try to do with my space, is look at some of the numbers in chronic disease and bring that to light and bring the researchers and the resources out that could help us rectify this. So if that makes sense for everybody, I'm like, I had to think about that, but we have to go back to some of the tools that we've always used. That leadership and using tools like radio. So yeah.
Wow. Say it loud. I'm thinking that in my
Yeah.
head, saying it in my head. I lost track of even what the question was, but I do want to talk about how real this problem is. Well, I live in Baltimore, and Baltimore is, if not the highest, is one of the highest rates of dementia in the country. It's the city with the highest rates of dementia in the country. To talk about preservation and how, memory loss and neurocognitive decline is an immediate, like, it just makes sense in your brain. It's like losing a generation or having a large portion of a population's memory loss is directly going against us preserving those stories. And with, I think it's up to 16%, with such a large portion of Baltimore City's Black elders having dementia. It's a real, talking about literacy and so people who don't talk about we always talk about literacy and the ability to read. But I recently looked at literacy as literacy is the ability to read different things and different subjects. So there is a lack of literacy when it comes to aging and healthcare and being a caregiver. There is a lack of understanding and comprehension of the terminology and the words to use, which is literacy. The people to talk to, how to string a sentence, to ask a question, because if you ask the wrong question, you'll get the wrong answer, you'll get the wrong resource, and then you've gone down the wrong path. So, I mean, that is literacy, and we don't have that literacy. And so you're right, listening to the radio, I constantly am now seeing more block party talk about the ways that we use to get out information, to share stories. I've seen more block parties with like health tents, where hospitals will have a tent at the block party, and just trying to meet people where they're at, especially in cities where there has been a history of health systems like Johns Hopkins misusing and abusing us. So it is immediate It's not an existential problem that's up in the ether. It is directly affecting our health and our community in some cities, like a city like my own. So yeah, I just want to make these. It's so important that we actively use the ways that we like radio, like having block parties, like story circles, like church. I mean, my grandmother was the youngest of 16, and they had a family church. One of the brothers started a church, and so all of my family are still at this church. And at the announcements, we went recently, and there were health announcements like, hey, you should get your prostate checked and you should do these things because that's where people are. That's where some of our elders are still, is in church, because faith has been a part of our history for so long. So don't be afraid to go and sit after church and get a meal and sit and talk and listen to stories because often, and tell stories because those are often not just historical stories, but just stories to add perspective, to change, to give insight into resources.
You couldn't have like ended on a it's so linked to what I want to add. And that is that we speak in stories. It's been our language for millennia. That's how we connect and understand people. When you come home and say, "How was your day?" You tell a story of your day. Now there's this new talk about telling a different story because that's the story that you want to live, right? Reframing your story so that's positive so that you can then like manifest positivity in your life. There's a lot of that kind of language going on. But how can we use that? I believe there is some truth in that. So I'm thinking about stories as tools. We don't want to just collect stories and have them sit like a doll on a shelf, right? Dolls are meant to be played with. They inspire imagination. And I think that stories can inspire imagination. So we want to use those stories as tools for the kinds of futures we want to see. So how can we use stories to influence policy, share them with policymakers, let them know this is how it feels to be an older Black adult in a gentrifying city, right? As your neighbors and family leaves and you're considering how you will depend on these new neighbors who you do not have a trust or even common cultural ground with, right? Or maybe you do, but you have to rework this whole lifetime of social investment, right? People invested in their neighbors because they're going to get a social outpay, a payment of care and this network of a social network when they are older. And so not only using tools to shape our future, but let's also ask older adults what kind of future would they like to see? So asking stories that are maybe in this traditional story sense, fiction, what fictions do we want to build together that will then plant the seeds for reality? Because there is no future that has come to be without someone's vision of it first, right? And so I really want us to consider not only gathering stories of the past and life experience, but what are our visions for the future and not just think that's the younger generation to do, right? It's our job to act out that vision, but let's gather some of that vision from our older adults as well.
This is good. I kind of don't want to move on to the next question, but this is all of you have just everything you've said is just amazing. And it's like a reminder that we really can use what we already have. It's just being strategic in how we use these tools that we all have. Moving on to the next and final question here. What are some of the key challenges in documenting the experiences of Black elders, particularly in communities with limited resources?
I'll start here. And I'll just jump in and say there are three things that stuck out to me. The number one is the fear part. And when I speak of fear, I speak of it on both ends, fear of the storyteller, and fear of the story getter. So when you're talking about fear, I'm like, me, if I'm telling the story, I'm scared to say too much. Because if I say too much, then I may have what little bit of resources I have taken away from me. And I think we've been conditioned like that as a people to not talk. We go silent. It's no snitches in the hood, right? So we don't want to say enough because what it might say might get my Uncle Joe locked up, and Uncle Joe is our provider. He's our breadwinner right now, even though it may not be that legal. Even my grandson is doing things he isn't supposed to do. I still need his cash. So it's fear from getting some stories. It's fear from the story getter because it's not a secret that, these neighborhoods that have a lack of resources have high rates of crime. So I'm going down here to get what I need and to get this story, but I'm scared of the neighborhood. I don't know what I'm going to encounter. And so I'm focused basically on hurry up, get in there and get out. And so when you have that type of thought process, the demeanor comes across cold and can come across cold and indifferent. And so if I'm trying to tell somebody something and I can sense that they might be looking around, they're scared, they don't want to be here, then it's going to cause me to clam up and say, well, let me just give you what you need so you can get out of here. And then I think about the desensitization of some of our seniors as well, because when I say desensitized, like I'm thinking of them having to struggle their entire lives from childhood into adulthood. So what you're asking me is normal to me. That story that I'm talking about, this is normal to me. I don't see it as a struggle because this is what I always do. This is day to day. So what story are you looking at? Are you asking like how I hopped from A to B over and skipped through C and back again? Oh, that's normal. So I didn't leave anything out on purpose. I don't see that as an issue because this is just how I live. And then inconsistency, going back to what you said, Dr. Croft, in the beginning about trust. Like, I don't trust somebody that I don't see all the time. I just trust that I'm going to see you annually, right? I just trust that you come here, you get what I need, you get what you need from me, mark some numbers off, you give me a bag and some chachi stuff from your table, but then I don't see where the information I gave you is benefiting my community or myself. So those are just some things that I saw.
Um, I think about, well, exactly what you said, Adrianne, is a lack of access to, there's inequities in aging. So because of those inequities in aging, some people don't get to continue to age. We were talking about this the other day, I think, when, aging is living. So when we talk about inequities in aging, it's an inequity in living. And it's not those some age better than others. No, it's some people get the privilege to age and some people do not. And so as far as if we're going down to preserving our elders' stories, we just need to get to a point where we're preserving our elders. I have a grandfather that's 85 and still cognizant and can tell stories, who was born in 1940 and may live until probably 2040. I have my grandmother's oldest sister, or older sister, not oldest. She's the youngest of 16. The oldest sister is gone. But one of my grandmother's older sisters just turned 100 2 weeks ago and did a speech and spoke about how she is proud. But both of those people have gotten to be at 185 because my grandfather, whenever he felt something wrong, he went to the doctor. He gets his checks. He told me the other day, yeah, I'm just going to get my eyes done and checking my heart. And he's cognizant about his health. He's making sure that he's watching his sugar because he has a history of diabetes. Like, if we don't preserve them and call them and say, hey, when's the last time you got your colon check? It's unfortunately, a lot of it is intersectionality. We have systemic ageism and we have systemic racism. Systemic ageism looks like the rise of individualism, where people are more concerned about themselves than the community. And it is a Western value that is spreading all over, is this rise of not really wanting to think about it's your child going to you and saying, hey, I need an allowance. It's taking from the community and giving to the individual, as opposed to the individual taking and giving to the community. And it's just individualism has prevented us from going and knocking on the door and saying, hey, grandma, I'm just going to sit here with you and we're just going to talk. Or, how are you doing? Or your grandma saying, I'm too busy to watch kids and I don't have time to watch nobody's children. And I've heard a lot of people, that happens, and people get busy. But if you don't watch your grandkids, they won't be able to access and preserve your stories. um, and lastly, I wanted to share that in my research preparing for this, I came across the Slave Narratives Project from the 1930s, which was a part of the Federal Writers Project, which Raina and or Dr. Croff, I'm sure you're very familiar with. And while this initiative helped preserve critical history, it also showed gaps in how Black elders were often excluded from mainstream historical documentation and specific interventions until specific interventions occurred. So it is an ongoing problem. And lastly, I work in aging services, and unfortunately, our healthcare system is matters in how we preserve these stories. If we have a majority of our elders in poorly funded and poorly prioritized in their communities, or senior living communities that are poorly prioritized in their communities, and those stories just go and washed away. As some of you may know, we just did a project at AG Roads in Atlanta, and we pasted 100, which is a predominantly Black nursing home that is, I've been in Atlanta in Grant Park for 125 years. They're celebrating their 125-year anniversary. And they have this big wall outside of the community that you can't see inside. And so we took 160 photos of resident staff and family members and pasted them on the wall outside, so that everyone who drives to and from the Atlanta Zoo or drives down Boulevard to go downtown can see that the faces that are inside their community. And people are already reaching out and saying, I saw the mural, I'd love to come and volunteer. I'd love to come and get engaged. I'd love to just learn the stories about these faces, because we hide them. Our senior living communities are often hidden and closed. And so it does take also our industry that serves older adults to prioritize sharing these stories. And I have to say, we are getting better, but we are missing the mark.
I'll say quickly, because I know, first I want to acknowledge that I loved hearing about the pictures being posted and making people more visible. But I'll be brief, because I really am interested in the questions that people have. And I'll just say that you talked about the rise of individualism. Well, I had posted a paper earlier when I couldn't think of what BRFA stand for, Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, and the study we did on that, how people understood those terms around memory loss and confusion, and those modules that they took in the survey. Well, we applied an Africana worldview, which emphasizes that when studying the behaviors of Black people, you need to center the Black experience when explaining behaviors of the African diaspora. So that means stepping away from traditional Eurocentric views, perhaps of individualism, but understanding that people may understand their own cognitive decline in terms of how it affects their relationship with someone else. Now, Black people are not the only ones to see cognitive decline in terms of how it affects their ability to relate to other people. Okay, but when speaking about memory loss and cognitive decline among older Black adults in particular, we need to approach it from an interconnected approach, from a community lens. Like, how does it affect their ability to be engaged in church, or how does it affect other realms in which there is a community setting, because that is often how we understand our own decline, right? And the second thing I want to say is that one of the barriers, I think, to getting stories and for people trusting us is this continued feeling of extraction with no give back. we touched on this before, so I'll be brief, but really being intentional about what is your promise of return and by when should people expect some kind of return, some kind of update about their stories and how they're being used or how their research participation is being analyzed and of use. And then I think thirdly is helping people to feel part of the larger story in America. Okay, so situating, I'm a researcher, so I'm always talking about their research experience and the stories of their experience in research, as well as the stories they bring to research, but situating research, their research experience within the larger national story of other people who are sharing their research experiences and why their particular story from this particular city, from this particular demographic matters in the larger changes and vision that we're trying to do to improve health disparities. And I think that helps people to feel part of a bigger research story, that they're really part of momentum of contributing to change.
Thank you for adding that. Great points for sure. We have a few minutes left, so we've got time to answer one question, which we do have. It says, storytellers need listeners. What can be done to make younger people receptive, even initiate the exchange?
They are. You have to meet them where they are. I love when I see like the seniors on TikTok, on Instagram, creating their YouTube channels. I love when I see them, kind of getting I don't know, indulged in, I would say pop culture, hip hop culture, in their own unique way. And I would say use some of those platforms to ignite some of those conversations. And then use those to create intergenerational programs. I know for many years we've had seniors from senior centers visit our elementary schools, our middle schools, and come and tell stories. I know someone here in the Atlanta area, they've formed like this pickleball tournament between seniors and eighth graders, and using that fun, unique space to say, hey, we're playing pickleball, but I've met a new friend, and she gets more requests from the eighth graders wanting to connect with the seniors on that end. But I would say just meet them where they are. It's not, it's still a digital divide, but I think more and more it's kind of closing. The gap is closing. And so I'm excited to see that. But I would just say that use some of these new tools of technology to keep that conversation going.
What she said.
Dr. Croft, you're on mute.
Got it. I don't have a whole lot to add either, but being present, so free of distractions, and we know that distraction can be the phone. Even if you're taking notes, it's still this screen, this divide, right? And by being present, that means also not being on your timeline, but being on their timeline. Because we have a very fast timeline, especially if you're an academic trying to get stories, but you got to be on the community's timeline and on the individual's timeline. I'd also say don't block off an hour because that's not going to work. Don't block off, just one day, one time. Maybe this is a continual unfolding of their story, which also, as your relationship deepens, I think the story deepens and what they're willing to reveal deepens. And as you ask questions and they see that their story is interweaving with your own story and that you're also willing to share, that they're not the only one on the spotlight, but you guys are entering in from a one-sided story to an interview, to a conversation, to a dance, you could say, or however, an interweaving of people's life stories. And that's where it gets really exciting because that is not an older person, a younger person. It's just two humans sharing their experience and where they're at.
I love that. Yes. All right, we've got one more question that will get answered. This is for you, Miss Jones. It says, where can we listen to your radio show outside of the state?
Okay, it streams. So it's in transition right now, but I have over 100 recorded shows on iHeart Radio. I know, right? 100. I couldn't believe it. But yep, this summer I think I reached like 120 or something like that, 115. But you can Google it on or search it on iHeart Radio. And you should be able to see Gerald Juice pop up. Or you
Thank
can
you.
go, guess what? You can go to my website.
What's the
SR
website?
SR, and I will put it in the chat for
Okay.
everyone. Hurry up and do that. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, this has been a great conversation today. I love how everybody built off of what the other person said. And it was just a great, informative conversation. I would like to extend our sincerest gratitude to our speakers. Thank you for your time and effort in preparing for this webinar and for sharing your knowledge with us. Feel free to reach out to our speakers if there is anything you would like to follow up on. And thank you again to our speakers for their time. And also to you all who attended the webinar, the kickoff of Big Week. We hope that you all found this as a useful and meaningful experience. I definitely learned a lot and I have some takeaways. I'm sure you all confident that you all have some takeaways as well. But we do appreciate you all and you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.